And with that, I don't want to take up any more time. We're really pleased that Grace has agreed to take time from her very, very busy schedule to talk to us a little bit about her involvement in these issues and the overarching world of IMAG, MSM, and the Multiscale Modeling Consortium. I don't want to take away any more of her time. Grace, please take it away.
Thank you, James, and thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be with you in this very new working group in the Multiscale Modeling Consortium. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. So my name is Grace Peng, and I am officially a program director at the National Institutes of Health in the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. And actually, my main hat is to manage programs for mathematical modeling, simulation, and analysis. And what I do for IMAG and the MSM is under my mathematical modeling program. You're welcome to check out my website on the NIBIB page if you have any questions about my regular program. So what I do with IMAG and the MSM is sort of my side hat, volunteer hat, but it's definitely a hat that I take with pride and shepherd along. And so James and Reinhardt asked me to talk about how the IMAG and the MSM functions and its structure, and a little bit of history too, to provide this working group a context of what you're doing and why you're doing it and what motivates all this activity. So the IMAG is the Interagency Modeling Analysis Group. We have over 100 program directors from multiple government agencies or in the federal government. These acronyms popping up are just a representation of the agency, the main agencies. Underneath each of these agencies are sub-agencies. And all of the program directors are committed to promoting modeling and analysis, in this case for biomedical, biological, and behavioral systems. And so that is IMAG, and IMAG is this forum for government program officers to really have a place for them to talk about their programs with each other, to leverage each other, because this is a field that needs leveraging. We do it better together than alone. And so IMAG is the government side of this activity, and the multi-scale modeling is what we call the extramural side, where all the awardees from the government agencies join in the Multiscale Modeling Consortium. And so the Multiscale Modeling Consortium started just from 24 projects way back in 2004 through interagency opportunities in multiscale modeling through an initiative between NIH, NSF, NASA, and DOE. And that group of 24 awardees decided that it would be great if they could communicate with each other and share their methods, because the initiative was really about how to model above and below the scale of interest, to study multi-scale modeling, develop methods to cross scales, address sparse data, address uncertainty, and to share methods no matter the domain in biomedical, biological, and behavioral systems. And so that's how the Multiscale Modeling Consortium was formed. You all probably are aware everything is on the IMAG wiki. And so again, this consortium got started because we recognized back in 2003 that we needed to get the community to go beyond their silos of modeling at a single spatial temporal scale and to go across scales. And so this is the landscape of biomedical, biological, and behavioral data scales. And so the spatial scales at the bottom and the temporal scales. And so we've expanded a lot of the scales above the whole human, because those scales are really important now with more and more usage of machine learning and AI. And so what we, again, still focus on in the consortium is the methodologies that cross above and below the scales of interest to try to address the very complex nature of biomedical, biological, and behavioral systems. It's not just an NIH consortium. It's a consortium of multiple federal agencies. So it's not just about health. It's about biomedical, biological, and behavioral systems. And so the consortium is organized around these task forces. So we have a task force for methodology and basic science and dissemination and clinical translation. And under each of these task forces are working groups. Now, these working groups were formed by the consortium members. So I should backtrack and say that the consortium members are.
Sorry, Grace.
Yes?
If you're advancing your slides, we're only seeing that initial circular slide.
Oh, really? Okay, let me just restart again.
I wasn't sure whether you were talking generically or whether you had slides to accompany, but there was a question about that.
So you see the circular slides now, and I just advanced it to the slide with the spatial temporal scales?
No.
You don't?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There we go.
You see the slide
Now we see
deck?
the full screen.
Okay. Do you see the? Am I moving my slides now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So these are the agencies. This is the consortium, and so you missed this slide, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So this is the spatial temporal scales. Hopefully you paid attention and heard me talk about it. But basically, again, that's the meat of what we're talking about in terms of science. This is how we're organized in terms of the task forces. And these are the working groups within the task force. And this particular working group, the multiscale modeling of viral dynamics working group, is within currently the clinical translation task force. Now, when James and Reinhard asked us to have this working group, we discussed it within the steering committee. And so this is the organizational chart that I made for you all. So we have, again, IMAG as the government agencies overseeing the steering committee, which consists of a rotating set of multi-scale modeling grantees, PIs. They oversee these task forces that I just showed. And so these task forces then oversee all the different working groups within that category of task force. And so when James and Reinhard asked us about this working group, they said, well, this working actually applies to all the task force. What should we do? And so the steering committee basically said, well, start with your main focus now, and we can move your working group around to the other task forces as your focus changes with your activity. And that will also integrate your activity within each task force and hopefully communicate with the other working groups in the task forces. So currently your task force is underneath the clinical translation task force. And so there's other working group, these two other working groups within that task force. And you all have your own organization here. And you had asked about how this is all organized. So the MSM members is everywhere within this diagram, but each working group co-leads, so we have co-leads for each working group. So James and Reinhard, they have the freedom to recruit whoever they want to join the participant list. So so all of you and any of your students and colleagues are welcome to join, and that they maintain their own list. And so in a sense, you operate independently, but they are your liaison back to the consortium through the task forces and the steering committee and IMAG. Now, again, many of you probably are also in the consortium too, but the organization is that James and Reinhard kind of tie you back in. So when anything comes down from IMAG or the MSM, they may post it on the wiki or send it to the listserv or let you all know what's going on from the consortium and vice versa. Whatever you all do that they think should be reported back up, they can report back up. So I keep saying that MSM and IMAG are of the people, by the people, for the people. It only works through your own interest and motivation. If you don't have the interest or motivation, the work just stops. There's no, way back when this consortium got started, you know, everybody was interested in the group of 24. And then more and more people started joining, more IMAG folks started joining, more MSM folks started joining, multiple working groups started forming. And they needed time to do all this work. So we ended up creating a funded mandate, and I think that's my next slide. So the events are, historically, in 2003, IMAG was created, and I can go into a little bit more history later. So 2003, that was created. 2004, we had our first initiative, and that funded the 24. And then once those 24 projects were funded, the MSM was formed in 2006. And 2007, we actually started the wiki. So before 2007, we actually were just communicating via regular old phone calls and Word documents. So we had the wiki, I should write that down in this timeline, in 2007. And we also released a second initiative to keep the funding going. And we actually had an assessment of our consortium in 2009. And then we released 2 more initiatives, which many of you are funded under the U01 initiative. So the difference between an R and a U is that the U provides more of a funded mandate because we require you to have a multi-scale modeling consortium plan where you can allocate funds to participate in the consortium, not just for travel dollars, but to do activities to help give you time to work in the consortium. We celebrated our 10th anniversary in 2017. So up until that point, we had about 10 years of consortium meetings. Then we had another futures meeting in 2018 to revisit the 2009 recommendations to check on where we're going. And then we started naming our meetings. In 2019, we had a meeting focused on translation and dissemination as a theme. And people were so excited at that meeting to do another meeting in the same year that was in March. And then in October, we had an integrating machine learning with multi-scale modeling meeting. So literally we scheduled that meeting the second day of the March meeting. And then in 2020, we had a meeting all planned, ready to go, but it was right when COVID was hitting, and we ended up abbreviating it to a 3-hour meeting for trainees, and we had actually a prize competition for nurturing diversity among the multi-scale modeling trainees. So these are some significant events, but essentially we created some funding for people to participate in the consortium activities through the U01 initiative. But at the end of the day, it is all about people utilizing this forum to benefit yourself and to use this opportunity to interact with IMAG and the MSM. If we have time, I can go through the wiki with you and walk you through on how to look at the resources. Definitely check out the FAQ page under the About IMAG. Look at it, under the resources page, there's the tools and databases and models. We also have COVID resources under the resources page that's updated daily in terms of the publications that are coming out. And so the annual meetings, these are just some of the posters from our annual meetings and showing all the people when we met in person. But I just wanted to highlight a few things just to give you a taste for some things that happened that took either, for this next one, it took a long time. So since the beginning of the consortium, the whole idea was we wanted to promote model sharing, model and data sharing standards, and model reproducibility. And people had different kinds of frameworks to create open sharing of models. But we realized that if you have that framework, you can open the door, but you can't make people walk through it. I'm sorry, I didn't start my timer, James. So I'm going to shorten my timer to 5 minutes, just to assume I have 5 minutes left. What we ended up doing was talking about how we make the models credible. How do we make somebody actually want to use your model? And so the Credible Practice of Modeling and Simulation Committee, the CPMS committee, created over the course of 8 years the 10 simple rules for model credibility. And we incorporated it into our initiatives and We've been trying it out. I've been advising my own grantees to use it as they're preparing their grant applications. And it was just published this past December 2020 after 8 years. So this is a long-term outcome, but this committee is actually a really great committee to model things after. They rotate their leads, and they also have their own advisory committee for this committee so that they can set their goals and define it. It did take a long time, but this is how they kept going to get these 10 simple rules going. These 10 simple rules are now applied to COVID-19. This year, I got together NASA, the CDC, DARPA folks to use the 10 simple rules and automate it for the COVID models to just evaluate the credibility of the COVID models. So that's getting used. Also, I just actually left a Spark call this morning. Spark is a consortium for stimulating peripheral activity to relieve conditions in the peripheral nervous system. They actually required the 10 simple rules in their grant application, and now they just made their awards, and we're talking to them about continuously using it during their modeling process. So this is a success story that we're pretty proud of. Something that happened really quickly, I already told you about, was the meeting in 2019 that was planned, that was inspired in March and planned in October, and 2 papers came out by January of this year. So this was an incredibly fast process that happened. And again, it was all because of the motivation of the people involved. They got excited, they brought people together, and I have to say Ellen Kuhl was just amazing in getting things to happen. And so that's another success story that happened on a very quick time frame within a year. So again, it's IMAG and the MSM are greater than sum of its parts, and it's really based on the people. Just a brief walk into history. How did this all start? In 1999, NIH had a BISTE report to promote biomedical computing. And so we had all these things happening at the NIH where NIH was recognizing that we actually need to promote more computing. At the same time, in 2000, my own institute, NIBIB, was formed. It was the last congressional act signed in by President Clinton at the time. And so NIBIB was formed. I joined NIBIB, and I was asked to just cover everything with numbers at the time. We had no portfolio. And so I basically worked within NIH to figure out where's the lay of the land in terms of modeling and analysis. Everybody was calling NIBIB to say, let's partner together, all the agencies. And so that's when IMAG was formed. It was formed because the other agencies wanted to partner with us. Multiscale modeling was a big talk of town with the DOE as well as NSF. And so that's how we got all this multiscale modeling to happen. And that's how this history occurred. And so if you all were back in that time, Ron White was our NASA rep, and he created the slide where he had this image of, we need all these foundational work for the anatomy, geometry standards, ontology, bioinformatics, to create these other interim subsystems to promote this idea of the physiome and understanding the physiome, the body from genes to whole human to populations, and the applications towards digital surgery, virtual soldiers, digital astronauts, digital patients, and eventually to reach out to affect education, training, healthcare delivery, and the needs of society. So that was the vision that we created way back when this all got started. So some reflections and lessons learned. My recommendation for this working group and everyone participating is integrate concurrent events to motivate the activities, entertain all ideas, even the craziest ideas, crowdsource, refine, gather, share, interact, repeat, and recruit partners, discuss cost benefits, delegate responsibilities, share ownership, evolve and understand mutually shared goals, communicate, document, or organize and archive, and make it fun. Make sure you're having fun. If you're not having fun, I think you should stop. And to the working group leads, I would recommend that you devise a rotating leadership if you can. and utilize a steering committee as needed so that the burden's not all placed on the leaders. That's oftentimes what has happened in the consortium, is that the co-leads feel like they need to actually make everything happen, and then they burn out. And so the reason why the CPMS was able to go on for so long was they actually rotated leadership. And there's nothing wrong with also, we have had working groups be archived and put on hiatus or merge or split up. And it's all because of the way the science happens and whoever's involved. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I just want to thank everyone for participating. It takes a village to make this all happen. And here's my contact. I'll stop here. I'm sorry if I went over time.
No, thank you very much. So we have time for a few questions. Anybody? You could definitely, Grace is incredibly responsive, so you could certainly talk to her offline, but questions now. Tomas?
Yeah, hi, this is Tom Helikar from the University of Nebraska. I'm wondering, so there were a couple of funding opportunities in this context, and it's now 5 years ago. Is there a plan for additional near-term funding opportunities in the multiscale modeling space?
So happily, multiscale modeling is now an accepted term at the NIH. And so since 2014, actually, we've had several initiatives. I'm very much involved in the NIH Brain Initiative. Spark, I had mentioned as well, are specific initiatives that promote multiscale modeling. If you have a multiscale modeling project, I would encourage you to just go ahead and submit it through, if you're interested in an NIH project, through our normal channels. If you go to the funding pages on the IMAG wiki, our IMAG agencies are continuously posting funding opportunities, or at least I have to keep reminding them to, but they all have initiatives. So multi-scale modeling is no longer the nascent term anymore. So we are moving on through different initiatives. I'm also starting up a new artificial intelligence initiative, and you know, I was just at a precision nutrition workshop and they were talking about multi-scale modeling. So a lot of the MSM members are now part of all of that. So I would encourage you to keep an eye out. You can also go to NIH Reporter and type in multi-scale modeling and find all the other projects and groups that are working on multi-scale modeling.
Time for one more question, if there's a short question. Grace has such a wealth of knowledge and history. It's always wonderful to hear her review how these things came about. And they wouldn't have come about without her dedication and incredible effort. So we all owe her a huge debt of gratitude.
That's very kind, James. Thank you.
Other question? Was there? Ruchira, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I just made a remark about, you know, maybe who is the audience of dissemination? So I guess, but that's kind of a broad question, maybe.
Yeah, that is a key point that everybody's talking about in terms of truly translating the models. We need to actually have people accept them, and we have to disseminate as much as possible. I actually just hosted a fellow who worked on creating an education page for the wiki to disseminate from K through 12, or I guess K through retirement, to really have people understand what models are and why they're useful. It really is the onus of the consortium too to disseminate as much as possible. The 10 simple rules that I mentioned is a means to really help clarify your dissemination. Like I said, I was just talking about the 10 simple rules to the Spark folks, and they're just getting started on their projects, and it's a perfect time to use the 10 simple rules to essentially create a framework for the paper that you would publish from the work that you're about to start. And so the 10 simple rules outlines it very clearly, starting with the context of use of your model and going down the line with, you know, listing your limitations and your version control and how you've conducted independent reviews, and basically allowing you to convince the other person that what I'm doing is credible. And it's a continuous process that you should be doing as you're developing your models.
Okay, I apologize. I think we have to move on. I hope
Thank
people
you.
will have, thank you so much again, Grace, for being willing to speak to us. That was a wonderful introduction and history.